Yo, welcome back to another video, you guys. I wanted to make this this tier list basically of the easiest classes to play to the most difficult classes to play as a whole, mainly for new players, people who have never played World of Warcraft. There's been a lot of new players, which is awesome. I love to see that for the game, or people that haven't played for a long time. And I'm bringing in some new friends and stuff like that, new players to World of Warcraft. They want to know what's easy to pick up, what's easy to play. So I thought I'd make this tier list for you guys of what I consider to be the easiest to play classes, easy to pick up. And the ones that are more difficult. I've played every single spec in the game, every single class in the game. I love WoW. I'm by no means a top tier expert player, but I would say like I'm an average, above average player, you know. This is mainly focused for Mythic Plus and Raid, so PvE content. Maybe we'll do a PvP tier list for easiest to play in the future if people like this video, if it helps you guys out. But I thought it'd be, a great video to make. I personally, when I first started WoW, I wish there was something like this because WoW can be, especially where we are now in retail, it can be overwhelming. There's so much stuff to learn about. There's so many things to do. So if you're a new player, it's really overwhelming. So having a class that just kind of get your feet wet, get to know the game, if you like it, if you don't like it, would be really helpful. So that's why I want to make this video. If you guys agree with me, for the veterans that are watching this video, if you guys agree with me, let me know in the comments below. Let me know why. If you don't, or if you do, whatever, I'm down for it. And I love the discussion always. And if you guys like the video, and consider hitting that subscribe button. Let's get into it. We got easy AF, kind of easy, kind of difficult AF. So these being the most difficult classes to play. Let's start with a couple easy ones. I'm gonna do Hunter. Hunter, I think, is one of the easiest classes to pick up. It's one of the first classes I'd recommend to new players that just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what class to play. I want something kind of easy to get my feet wet. You know, I just want to get in the game. I recommend Hunter. Okay. I think it has the easiest specialization in the game, and that's Beast Mastery. The rotation's pretty simple. They have range DPS, so I think that's a little bit easier. You got some survivability, like your oh shit button, your turtle button, or your turtle shell. And so I think that's really good. There is some more depth, I think, in marksmanship and survival. But overall, I think the class as a whole is much more beginner-friendly. Is a high skill ceiling. I think that goes for all these classes, but much easier to get into and perform relatively well with, for sure. I think the next one is Warrior. I think Warrior is also one of those same classes, easy to get into, easy to get your feet wet, start doing some content, get familiar with the game, understand the game better. And if you're looking for something to tank, Protection Warrior, honestly, it's in a great spot for one right now. But it's a very easy tank to just kind of get in, learn what the game is about, or how to tank in dungeons or raid, and perform well in. I really love the specializations, kind of your classic, you know, one-handed, you know, sword and shield tank. I've loved them for a long time. Then you got Fury and Arms. Arms, I think, is a little bit more difficult aside of the three specializations. I think it's just more methodical and tactical with how you use your abilities, your cooldowns. Fury Warrior is like kind of zug, hit everything, smash everything. There's some depth there for sure, but I think that overall, I think they're pretty easy to pick up, very beginner friendly. One of the first specializations I'd recommend to new players. Next, I think is Demon Hunter as a whole. I think it's probably easy AF, but I might even do kind of easy. Vengeance Demon Hunter, I think it's a very good tanking spec to pick up on and do pretty well with. I think that when you're pushing higher content, you really need to know how to use their damage mitigation when you're using cooldowns. You're kiting, because you have great mobility, and to use that well, it will be very beneficial for your group and your team. So there's some like learning there. Havoc has kind of also been one of those specs where it's been kind of like, oh, it's like the easiest spec to play in the game. But I think with Dragonflight, it has offered some more depth to it. But you still have great leech, so survivability, defensives for your group, yourself, blur, darkness, featherwalk. You great damage, great mobility, but I think it's still a relatively easy spec or class as a whole to pick up on. I think both of them are to get into. Again, I think higher skill ceiling for sure, probably more for Vengeance than Havoc, but in a great spot. I think it's definitely one of the easier classes to play. Death Knight, I'm going to go with kind of difficult, okay? So, like I said, I played every spec in the game. There's a couple specializations I think that I found to be more difficult for me, for Death Knight specifically. Blood Death Knight. For some reason, I love tanking. It's my favorite thing to do. I had a harder time getting into tanking with Blood DK and understanding the abilities, the rotation, than I do with some of these other tanks. I think there's some more depth to it. What the talents do, kind of reactive to like healing yourself. Now, they're fantastic tanks. Blood Death Knights are fantastic. But a little bit more of a learning curve, but some people might laugh and think, no, it's not. It's easy as heck. But for me, it was more difficult. And I think for some new players, I would also say that. But again, the survivability is kind of nuts. But I think Frost DK is really easy. Not really easy. There is some depth to it as well, especially the Breath of Syndragosa or whatever. That's a much more difficult build, which is partially why I'm putting it here. I think Frost DK, if you're not running that, which you probably are, but if you're not, then it's much more easy to do damage, do well, play it in any type of content, which is really nice. Unholy Death Knight, I think, is another one of those specializations I had a little bit of a harder time grasping. It's not that hard to do damage, honestly, with Unholy DK, though, now. It's like, I mean, you're basically popping your cooldowns when you have them up, and you're just doing damage. You don't even have to do your rotation right to do a ton of damage right now. But I do think there's a little bit more depth to them, especially to perform at a higher level. Again, along with Frost DK and Blood Death Knights, I think they're all like a little bit more difficult, especially more difficult than these three classes as a whole. Let me know if you agree with me or not, though. Druid, man, this is a hard one. I think they're kind of easy. I'm gonna probably put kind of easy, but they might be, like kind of difficult. It depends on how high of content, but for new players, I think I'd still recommend Druid being one of the first classes because there's 4 different specializations. You can tank, you can heal, you can be a ranged DPS, or you can be a melee DPS. Each one of them offering different difficulty depending on what you're doing. But I would say as a whole, they're easier to play. I think the Guardian Druid is one of the easiest tanks to play. A lot of defensive, some healing abilities for yourself. Great AoE. Your tanky is shit while you're tank, but, that might not... Yeah. Anyways, but I think as a whole, they're much easier to pick up, much more beginner-friendly. Guardian Tank, Resto Druid. High skill caps for both, again, and even for the DPS specializations. But picking up as a whole, I think they're much easier to pick up than some of these other classes and easy to understand, Your rotation is incredibly difficult, and great mobility, great utility for your group and stuff like that. I love this class, but I do think there's a really high skill ceiling for Druids. And I think that most players would agree with me too. And I see some Druids perform, it could be a specialization like Balance could be an S tier spec right now. And I see some people that kind of just doing whatever damage or a little more difficult for them. And then you see the top performers, the high skill ceiling, they push that up there and they're performing way above these other Druids, So I think there's a really high skill ceiling. That's why I think I'm not going to put them in easy AF. But I also think that they are more beginner friendly to get into. So higher than Death Knight. Man, the new Evoker class. First of all, I love this class. Great addition to the game. Devastation. I think it's really easy to pick up. I think even to do well with. I don't think it's that difficult, to be honest with you. But it's really fun. But I think that Preservation also, I'm going to do kind of easy. Okay, so I think Preservation is also easy to pick up and beginner friendly. But I think mainly their Echo ability is such a high skill ceiling. Like if you do that right, along with like Rewind, even maybe your Dream Breath when you're using it, like your interrupts. I mean, there's so many explosives, for instance, this week, and Preservation Evokers just being able to kill those really quick in Mythic Plus content. Both the specializations are easy to pick up, easy to get into, but I think Preservation runs on the more difficult side of healers just with the Echo ability. Some of their abilities, their Echo Regeneration, basically Echo, if you didn't know, basically duplicates a spell like a heal. So there's some times where you can save your group if you know how to use that well and do it all the time. The basic rule of thumb is usually use Echo and then use a healing ability. It's almost like the basic rule for them. But I would say they are more difficult. I think Devastation is easier, so I would put them in kind of easy. Not quite easy AF, but pretty close probably. Probably right around with Druid. Let's go Mage. Man, Mage. I think Mage as a whole is more difficult than... I think there's some specializations that are harder here. Okay, my hardest specialization to pick up in the game, and you guys can think I'm silly or whatever, but it was Fire Mage for me. I don't know why, but I had a really hard time picking up that specialization and do well with it in higher Mythic Plus content and raiding content. Raiding content was a little easier. But to get it down, highly performed really well. I think it was much harder. I think it was harder to get the rotation inside those burst windows. It was wild inside your Combust, especially for Shadowlands. At least it felt like that to me. Arcane, harder spec. And if someone's saying it's easier, man, please tell me why in the comments below, because my gosh, that spec, I love that spec, and it's really fun. I actually think I had an easier time learning Arcane than I did Fire for some reason. But Arcane is, I think, a very high skill cap. Fire Mage, very high skill cap. Frost Mage, less of a high skill cap. or I think there's a skill cap up there, but they're easier to pick up, easier to get into. Frost Mage is the easiest specialization of the three, at least for me, and I think it would be for new players coming to the game. But also depends on your, I don't know, your history of gaming, whatever. Either way, I think it is, they're one of the most difficult specs to do well with. Their CCs, their survivability. I think they are more difficult, but once you get them down, man, they're fun. They're super fun. Love this specialization. Let's go Paladin next. I'm gonna do kind of difficult. Kind of easy. Let's go kind of easy. I think I would still recommend them to new players. I think Retribution Paladin specifically, I think they're one of the easier classes to pick up and play. You've got oh shit buttons. You've got great damage, especially right now. Holy, they're cheesing people right now. But they're doing really good damage. Good single target, good AoE, easy to pick up. Not a lot of abilities to control of. Now there is a high skill ceiling if you know when to use your blessing of protections, you know, your bubble, your off heals. I mean, there's a lot there, especially with, I think, the healing specialization. There's some more difficulty there, especially with being a melee healer. So I think that's some more difficulty. I don't think Protection Paladin is hard either. So I would, yeah, definitely put them in kind of easy, I think, over kind of difficult. I think they're harder to learn than Death Knight for sure. But they can do all three roles. They can tank, heal, DPS. Each one of them is a little bit different, but I think Rep being one of the easier classes, Rep Paladin being one of the easier specs to play, and Prop Paladin as well being easier specs to play, with Holy Paladin being a little bit more difficult, I think, in some situations, especially some Mythic Plus and PvE for sure, or PvP for sure. Let's go Monk next. I'm gonna put them in difficult. I don't think Windwalker for me it feels natural. Like, I love that spec. I think it's easier to pick up. It was a little difficult when I first learned it a long time ago, but I think it is pretty easy to pick up and do pretty well with, honestly. But a high skill ceiling for sure. I think also Brewmaster and Mistweaver are a very high skill ceiling. Monks in general offer they're just different playstyle than a lot of other classes, any other class, honestly, with how they deal damage, take damage, heal. But, you know, you just, for instance, their tanking, their mitigation, they don't take a lot of damage up front like most tanks. Like, if someone hits for 100k, and it hits you for 100k, you get hit for 100k, unless you pop something else like a defensive or something like that. Monk is a little bit different. You don't take the 100k initially, you take it over time. Now that seems really good. I think it is good for some beginners, like, oh, I'm not gonna get one shot or something like that, or two shot. But being able to manage that well and manage the damage you're taking over time, and to work with your healers well in your group, I think is more difficult. One of the more difficult tanking specs for me to pick up for sure. I think it was probably harder than Blood Death Knight for me, just because it was so different than anything else I play. Mistweaver, I think, is also in a spot where they are slightly more difficult. They offer different play style, but I do think that beginners could get into it and play them well. All three specs rock great mobility, good utility for the team. And I do like playing, and I would recommend them, but I do think they're on a more difficult side of things, especially if you're trying to get higher content. Priest, I would say, is kind of difficult. I think Shadow is more difficult for a lot of players. From what I've seen from new players and guild members, they've had a tough time picking up Shadow, and let me know if you agree with me or not, if you had a tough time picking up with it, if you've played it before. I didn't have such a tough time myself, but I think I just kind of clicked with it a little bit. But I think there is a crazy high skill ceiling for Shadow Priest, but a really fun specialization overall. Disc, I think, is easier to pick up on the healing side of things. I personally love Disc Priests. I think they're fantastic. Great healers. One of the best healers I'd recommend to pick up if you're a beginner to healing. Disc Priest for sure. Holy Priest, I think, is harder. I think it was harder for me to pick up. I think it's harder for a lot of newer players, especially. Just some abilities, some cooldowns. I think that maybe I don't connect with. I think it would be more difficult for a lot of new players if they never played WoW before to understand. But let me know if you agree with me or not. I think Disc being easier, Shadow being more difficult, and Holy Priest being more difficult. I think that's why I'd put them in the kind of difficult tier. Rogue, I put in difficult AF. Okay, Outlaw Rogue, I don't think is that hard. I think it's pretty easy to pick up. It's kind of one of the easier specializations I would recommend to people. High skill ceiling though, for sure. But I think they're easy to pick up, do well with, especially right now. But I think Assassination and Subtlety are much harder specs to play and do really well with. Like, I think you've got to practice, get your rotations down, know when to use your burst cooldown windows, or like Assassination Rogue. I've actually personally loved playing them right now, and they're in a really good spot, especially for single target and pretty good in AoE. although you have to kind of build in different ones. But I think there are, like, you're managing your poisons. Sometimes you spec into, you've got 4 different poisons to manage on your weapons. It's not hard, but for new players, I think that might be a little more difficult to understand what's going on there and to pick up. I would say they're one of the hardest specializations to play, and I will stand by that 100%. Shaman, man, Shaman I think is either in the kind of difficult, I think they're in the kind of easy to kind of difficult, like right there. I think that they, I think they're pretty easy to pick up with just their basic rotation. I think when you're trying to get better at the game and push higher content, that they will offer a lot more challenge to you. Elemental Shaman, I think right now with their class design, I think is awesome. I personally love it, and the talents that they have to choose from. But I think there is some more depth to it than before, which I really like. But it can be more difficult for beginners to pick up, especially if you're new to the class. Enhancement Shaman I don't think is, again, that hard to pick up and initially start, but to do some more damage, I think it just takes a little bit more practice to get into and all that jazz. And Restoration Shaman, again, I don't think the basic healing abilities are that hard. I would recommend Shaman. Maybe I do put them at lower kind of easy tier. I think they're one of the easier classes to Resto Shaman, like, I would recommend to pick up, but man, using your totems well at good times, you're about to take damage, do make good opportunities. I think there is more difficulty there, more depth. Really fun to play though, very engaging. Like, you feel very rewarding, I feel like, with healing and all that. But I would say it's kind of easy to the more kind of difficult side. I think it's like an in-between. If there was a tier in between both of these, I'd probably put Shaman there. Let me know if you'd agree with me below. I'm going to put Warlock in the kind of difficult tier. I think Destruction is probably one of the easiest specs to play in the game for range DPS, especially for casters. I don't think it's too difficult to get into. Great for beginners. You do really pretty good damage, especially I think right now they've definitely risen up a little bit. But I think Affliction offers some more depth. Again, not super hard, but is a different spec than any other spec in the game, which is a big deal. But very fun to play. Just definitely more depth and high skill cap. And then Demonology, I think, is more beginner friendly. I think it is. And, you know, maybe I should like put them low, kind of easy, maybe kind of. Affliction. I feel like Affliction is a little bit more difficult than Demonology and Destruction. Destruction for sure. Demonology, or yeah. I think Demonology is probably the medium side of things. I don't think it's incredibly difficult, but I do think they have more depth than they had in Shadowlands, which I really like. I think there are certain abilities that take a little bit more skill to organize with the packs and damage that's happening. But I do think they do good single target, good AoE. They're incredibly tanky, so you can like miss mechanics and be fine. So I would probably put them in the more, I don't know, I'm doing low kind of easy. Yeah, we'll do that. But this is what I think this is pretty accurate of what I agree. I think these are the easiest specs to play in the game. I think these fall right around kind of easy. I think probably in this row. Let's see. Yeah, I'd probably keep them here. So left being the easiest to play, to the right being more difficult. So Hunter being the easiest, Warrior, Demon Hunter, Druid, and so forth. I think that's pretty accurate. Kind of difficult, Death Knight Priest, difficult AF. I think that Mage, Monks, and Rogues are the most difficult specs to play, but really fun, very rewarding. So thank you guys for checking out the video. Hope you guys liked it. I hope it helped you out if you're a new player and deciding what you're going to play or what you aren't going to play now. Let me know if you agree with me in the comments below. Thank you guys so much. Also, I'm streaming on Twitch, so feel free to go check me out over there. I'm streaming throughout the week, and I post in my Discord when I go live. So thank you guys for all the support on the channel. You guys have been amazing. I love you guys, each and every one of you. Seriously, thank you, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.